spancel is a hoop. It's a hoop that is used to bind cattle, to keep horses on fence posts. It's a round thing, so that means nothing. The Spancel of Death, it's a hoop made in a magical practice with the skin of a corpse. It's deep, dark magic to bind someone to you until death. What I figured out was my uncle was writing about my ancestors in 1777. So he was writing a story about someone from his past, and I'm coming into it reading about his writing. It was just like the time kind of wove together like a Celtic knot. And I have the letters from my uncle to the poet Yeats saying, "You said you'd do my play. I really need you to do it." And Yeats just saying, "The rising has happened. People are distressed. Their souls are weary. Their hearts are broken. We cannot put this play in front of people." It's again kind of Lady Macbeth, kind of Ophelia. This woman's gone mad because she's worn this hoop of human skin, which she bound her feet to the landlord's feet in the spell for several days, and then she's had to wear it as a belt around her own waist for the rest of her living days. And this has driven her slowly mad, this thing that she had to do. And again, all true. This has actually happened. This spancel is something my great-great-great-grandfather held in his hands. It's not, none of this is untrue, which is so distressing.
Welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore mysticism, magic, esoterica in the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Aoife Anastasia Nally is an artist, performer, and theatre producer who for the past few decades has been performing in the West End, London, but is currently based in rural Ontario, Canada. Now today we discuss her research into the cursed play The Spancel of Death, penned by her great uncle T.H. Nally, who was an Abbey Theatre playwright and a personal friend of the great poet WB Yeats. Now, to make things a little bit more interesting, Aoife is also a psychic medium, seer and trance channel. This notorious play was interrupted by the Easter Uprising in 1916 and subsequently abandoned by WB Yeats, eventually giving rise to the belief it was cursed. Now, those of you who are not familiar, say, with Irish history may not be too up to speed with what the Easter Uprising was. Essentially, it was an armed rebellion that took place in Dublin, led by Irish Republicans, against British rule in Ireland. Now, the aim here was to establish an Irish Republic and really to leave the United Kingdom and sever Ireland from the clutches of the British Empire. Now, technically, it was a complete failure. The rebellion was suppressed. The signatories of the Proclamation of Independence were summarily executed, with the exception of Eamon de Valera. But what happened as a result? Well, as Yeats famously declared, a terrible beauty was born. And the execution of the leaders of 1916 really swayed public opinion, who were previously against the rebellion. They saw it as a deeply annoying and pointless endeavour. But after their execution, it swung public opinion, and that led to a series of events that built up to the War of Independence, or the Tan War, as it's also known. I'm sure you'll have heard of the infamous Black and Tans, the British soldiers that brutalised Ireland. Now, before I deviate any more from the actual podcast and start going down Irish history, I will stop talking about it and let's get back to the point. So what was so notorious about this play? Why was it believed to be cursed? Well, it wasn't helped by the fact that it was named after the spancel, as it were. The Spancel of Death is named after nothing less than a necromantic spell of the blackest magic, and is based on actual events that took place in Balla County Mayo, Ireland, in 1777. So, it also takes a pot at the church. It has a witch essentially castigate a priest and wish evil upon him and get away with it. So it's extremely controversial. Bearing in mind, this is over 100 years ago in a very, very uptight and religious Ireland that this play was being put forward. Now, in the Plus show, we get into Aoife's research with Yeats's actual magical diary that she had the privilege to look through and read his notes, or notes that he received from Maud Gonne and what have you. She discusses his Golden Dawn notebook and the notes he has in there, and she talks about her experiences as a trance medium and a channel, and having a family history of gifted and magical people. And she calls that the family business, which I think is a lovely way of phrasing it. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, then by all means sign up to the Patreon. You'll get the Plus show, the show a week early, along with extra content and a host of other benefits. I'm always interested in people's experiences with the other, from the jinn to the fairies and beyond. And if you have a story to tell, then reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. I'm always interested in the stories that people have to tell. Okay, right, let's get into it. Hello, Aoife Nally. Welcome to the Spirit Box. Lovely to have you here.
Oh my goodness, thank you for having me. Big fan of the show. Been listening for a while now. It's exciting to be here. Thank you.
Well, we've had to turn off our cameras because of I think we've got dodgy connections at both ends. But briefly, I saw your background. You're somewhere in the wilds of Canada, and it looks frankly pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I'm on a cliffside over Lake Huron, which is a lake big enough to house, well, the whole island of Ireland. It's a massive lake, and I'm on an eroding 150-foot cliff in a little cabin. Self-isolating in the coolest way possible.
That sounds amazing.
And just connecting with nature, and it's awesome. You forget in a good way there's a pandemic because you're alone because you want to be alone. you know. It's marvelous. You might hear birds, you might hear chainsaws and trees.
That sounds incredible. That sounds incredible. So we exchanged a few messages, I think, in the summer of last year, and you're an associate of Elise Ursa, who's been on the show a couple of times, who introduced us, and I mean, when Elise first spoke to me about you, she's like, you've got to listen to my friend. She's got this incredible story, and told me a little bit about the Spancel of Death and kind of some of the discoveries that you made while doing all your work on the play. I mean, before I start to garble the actual story, I'm going to hand over to you to kind of explain what the Spancel of Death is and kind of your relationship to it and some of the things that have unfolded. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for me, it's a story I've grown up with since the minute I was born, and fact is sort of secondary to the strength of the mythology. So I never claim to be accurate, but I will spin you a good yarn about this. Basically, the family mythology was that I had a great uncle named Thomas Hussein Nally, T.H. Nally, who was a playwright for the Abbey Theatre back in around 1916, that era. And according to family lore, he was meant to premiere a play the day the uprising began. So in the way they tell it, he had the keys. The play was cancelled. The actors left the stage. He turned the key and the British guns shelled the theater. Everything melted and he was the last to leave safely with his life, and the play was abandoned and considered cursed forever. That's the sort of lore it was told in. I now know that, the Abbey was never shelled, a few bullet holes here and there. He never had the keys, but he was a playwright. So I prefer the mythological, this great figure that strode out of the theater just in time. But it would be, I think, the play itself.
It'd be remiss of him not to have a sense of drama.
Of course, being a playwright. So I have no idea who this man was. With very few pictures of him. Even the Abbey Theatre didn't know much about him. And the story kind of lived in the back of my mind growing up, and I've been on stage now since I was 6 years old, going from play to play, from musical, became my profession, and I began to be a playwright myself. And that figure was always in the background, as a distant story. When my own play that I completed in 2009 was interrupted by tragedy, I went in search of my uncle. I just had to get out of my own life and find him. So I ended up in 2016 at the 100th anniversary commemorations of the Rising, and ended up walking straight up to the Abbey Theatre, and they had a whole group of people there on the Easter Monday morning, and they said, "I'm so sorry you can't come in. This is for descendants only." And I pointed to the Spancel of Death poster, which hung in the Abbey Theatre lobby for decades upon decades. And they went, I'm related. T.H. Nally, here's my passport. Let me in." So
That's
so that was
incredible.
the reading. Yeah, and actually a lovely one of the academics there to give a speech about the Abbey rebels, because I didn't have a ticket and they were kind of still holding me back at the door, adopted me for the day as a family member, and snuck me into the proceedings and the photographs and the cake, and I became sort of this random figure who knew something about this random figure. And to them, he's an unlucky man, this footnote, this person they know nothing about. And for me, he's this wildly important person. So that began the exploration. I mean, you hear this phrase, the Spancel of Death, and I'm sure everyone who's hearing this is like, well, what on earth is a spancel? Why of death? What is this thing? So that's kind of the first port of call. I mean, a spancel is a hoop. It's a hoop that is used to bind cattle, to keep horses on fence post. It's a round thing, so that means nothing. The Spancel of Death, it's a hoop made in a magical practice with the skin of a corpse. It's deep dark magic to bind someone to you until death. So that was my first discovery going into this, not knowing anything about the play that was abandoned or my uncle, or that me having started my magical path had an uncle who was that much farther down. So I got kind of thrown into this adventure, deep dive feet first, suddenly in these commemoration celebrations. And I was taken on a merry ride through Dublin that weekend, and was helped by the Abbey and the archivists there, who were like, when I asked why isn't my uncle on the plaque, he clearly had revolutionary leanings. He was writing subversive theater. Like I knew in my heart that he was a rebel on the side of good. I knew this, but they said they couldn't put his name on the plaque until they had proof of his revolutionary, his activities. They didn't know when he died, who he was, why he wrote what he wrote, and so they sent me into the archives almost right away. And they said, I think there's a script of this piece in there. And if you can prove you're an ancestor, they'll let you have a look at it. Do you know what I mean? and what was great is the reason there is a script in that archive is one of the actors, all of which were rebels, and a whole nother story, fabulous actresses and brave men who were hiding guns beneath their dressing room tables in the theater. And the reason there's a script left is one of them came back, gave his script to the company manager, signed out so that he could grab his gun. Like,
no way. That's insane.
Thank you for that.
Wow.
Thank you. I know. So I got to go into the archives that weekend. And I know at the Abbey, they have the program, they have the poster. And it was twinned with Kathleen Nahulahan. They were going to do a two-act, a double header that night on the April the 25th. And of course it was abandoned. So I went into this archive to find the script, again, not knowing the subject matter, Spancel of Death, this dark, scary thing. What was my good Edwardian uncle writing about? And so I got my white gloves on, this onion skin script, very thin, a lot of markings on it. It's yellowed. It's not in great shape. And I just started reading it, as you can in this beautiful, quiet archive overlooking the Kildare Club, which is ironically where the Abbey Theatre was formed. I didn't know, but that's where, Yeats and Lady Gregory would be having their big tea and discussion. And I'm looking out that window over this script. And I was just, it was unfolding before me, this incredible story of what I figured out was my uncle was writing about my ancestors in 1777. So he was writing a story about someone from his past, and I'm coming into it reading about his writing. It was just like the time kind of wove together like a Celtic knot. Like there were these three weird timelines in the opening of the script. And the first line on the first page, and the thing that I think is the most important thing with this script, is it says based on absolute fact. And that the energy of that, and I know that the way my uncle thinks now that I've read his diaries, his letters, everything, is he was dedicated to the truth and absolutely wanted to bring the reality of those people in 1777 who had to do this desperate magic to overcome the landlords and the oppressors and get that little bit of power back that they could. That this whole script, word for word, was the best he could do to bring absolute truth to the stage. And the Abbey Theatre being like the soul of Ireland in a box, where the psyche of the nation was figuring itself out, where the Cultural Revolution was sorting out the soul of the nation. Like, it was such a potent place. It wasn't entertainment. It wasn't a passive space for to lose 2 hours of one's life. It was the deep soul of the people. So I'm like, oh my God. So I start reading this thing. It's almost impossible to read because it's written in phonetic dialect and a lot of Gaelic. So it's set in County Mayo in the small town of Balla in 1777. And I'm reading this, and he forces you to read in the accent. He's written it in perfect phonetics. So on the page, it's really hard work. And it's taken me hours just to work my way through a sentence, because I'm coming from Canada, did not grow up in Ireland. I don't have that rhythm in my veins, And I get to these magical moments where these women are just by degrees sinking into deeper and deeper and darker magics and more desperate measures, and watching this sort of spider witch weave this web around this landlord and the innocent girl. It was just like, and then it hits the actual necromancy, the really hardcore description of very black magic. And I dropped the script in the archives. I remember I was like, I thought I would pass out. It was absolutely terrifying. And I thought, how did anyone think they could put this on stage? It was like, what? And he said that in his footnotes. He's like, you may have to cut this. Yeah, it's really intense, very intense, and it's grand guignol. It could be seen as melodrama. I don't see it as melodrama, but it grabs you by the throat from minute one and kind of drags you through this relentless descent into hellish desperation. So I thought I was going to pass out in the archive. It was very powerful. I'm a fainter from way back, so I was like, oh my Lord, I'm going to take a little breather. And I can see why people think it's cursed. Absolutely. And it did have the quality around it.
Right.
It's always had an air around it. And I thought, my first thought was, this is the Irish Scottish play, because I'm coming from theater. So I'm thinking the name of this play should not be spoken. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I immediately felt the air ripple. I can only describe it in sensation. So it felt very prickly. It felt very dangerous. It felt very like alive in the hands. And I'm like, I don't even know what this would sound like out loud, but I have to do it. You know what I mean? And I knew at once it was my prerogative to get it into the world safely and as soon as I could. So I was allowed to take a photograph of every page.
Well, I'm just looking.
Restore it. So
actually, we'll come back to this. You're saying something more interesting, and I'm thinking about a different question.
Oh gosh, I'm saying everything in the wrong order.
You carry on. You were taking photographs of the manuscript.
No, well, I collected the pages to revive it. So that's how I got these. There's two surviving scripts now. They've found a second one. So I was allowed, with my special ancestral allowance, to take pictures of the script and transcribe it. So that was another whole thing. I'm a big wimp with this kind of thing. I'm very sensitive and I could feel it. So it was a really scary process for me, even to type it out. Maybe it's just my blood, like and I was like, the genuine struggle with my family was, does this play? I knew I needed to bring it to the world, break the curse. But I always, in the back of my mind at first, it was like, maybe it is stopped for a reason. Maybe this shouldn't live in the world. What there was a moral struggle and an energetic struggle going, well, am I strong enough to contain this energy? Because there's a lot going on, and it has the energy of the uprising in it as well. Like, there's a lot of subversive, rebellious, anti-church, pro-woman. Like, it's really, there's a serpent in that wood pile. It's not something that should be taken lightly by anyone, and it's always failed. So many people did try to have a go at it because it's kind of like infamous, ooh, spooky, it's kind of notorious, and it's had a few almost readings. I know that the almost production happened in Boston. They did a partial staging of it, but it absolutely fell apart because I think they played it as a melodrama. They went for high Edwardian teapot, sort of acting. I think, like, it got terrible reviews. It didn't really hit the air. I know the Abbey Theatre's never really taken a crack at it. They did a partial reading in the basement in the Peacock, and again, didn't do the whole thing, didn't put it on its feet. No one's really had the cojones to get it there. And there's been, my ancestors have tried for years to get it as a radio play, as a television show, or, again and again tried to bring it to the air, but nobody's been able to get it. And I wonder if it's the archaic quality of the language, the dark themes, the overt magic. Like, there's the anti-church at the end. I can see it would be a struggle. And even Yeats himself, like, it was canceled in the Rising, but they still had the rights to the play. And I have the letters from my uncle to the poet Yeats saying, you said you'd do my play. I really need you to do it. And Yeats just saying, the Rising has happened. People are distressed. Their souls are weary. Their hearts are broken. We cannot put this play in front of people. They need Oscar Wilde. They need levity. They need respite. They can't, this play, we can't do it. We need bottoms and seats, essentially, is what he's saying. And that's understandable. I get it. This play is challenging even now. Like, even now, you can't sit easy in it. It's not, it's not for everyone as well. But yeah. Where was I?
It sounds remarkable, and I think when you talk about the rhythm and pace of things, particularly with it being written phonetically, like, you can't help but start to speak in that way. I find as well, if I read folk tales, like if I'm reading folk tales written by particular authors who happen to write in an Irish way, that my accent gets stronger even just after reading them.
Yeah.
But so I can imagine that kind of drawing you into place and drawing you into the time through the language, but then that must be magnified tenfold when you're literally have an ancestral blood connection taking you right back to the place. It's interesting that the play was based in Mayo. Did you say it's Balla, Balla, is it?
Yeah, so I should explain. My uncle was born and raised there, and the Nally family, like my ancestors on my father's side, have come from there for a long, long time. And historically, they were the baddies. They were the landlord's thugs, who collected the rents and did some very naughty things for a long time. So in my uncle's generation, they started turning that around and started fighting the cultural war with Gaelic sport and language. And
Mm-hmm.
really, in one generation, they turned from baddies to goodies, and they actually defied the landlord and broke ties. And it was very sudden change. So Bal, even now, there's a family manse. I think it's called Roxley House. I'm not completely sure on the name, but
Yeah.
to this day, if you go to Bal and your name is Nally, so I've obviously gone for my research because everything's absolute fact. So you can see the church where the spancel was disposed of. You can go to the landlord's house. You can see where the shack may have been. Like all of these, it's real, 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 real. So I go, and my cousin's showing me around, and half the people who hear my name consider me revolutionary hero from a long line of really good blooded people, and the other half have destroyed the house, salted the earth, buried horse heads under the floor, carved curses in the lintels of the doors.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's an edict on the land that no Nally can ever buy that house again. And the people who've bought it, have had a terrible time, and their cattle have died, and their children have left home, and they're struggling with this land.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, to walk into the West Country for me, as a having grown up outside, to step into that level of superstition and the long oral history and the blood that remembers, that long remembering Irish blood, especially in the Wild West. I was like,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and instantly I get activated on that land, right? I'm charged. And a man walks up to me and he goes, "I've got your horse." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "You're Nally, I've got your horse." Thinking, I have no idea. And it was a horse that he traded with one of my ancestors that won a race once, that's buried on his land, and he still thinks it's my horse. Like
Yeah.
the past and the present are very close there. And I found it a really, really tricky place to visit, because there's been a lot of trauma and a lot of famine and a lot of,
Yeah.
I get lost walking across the field because the energy, there's so many streams underneath the land, and I'm like, I feel like I'm walking in circles in the West. It's so
Yeah.
powerful.
I mean, like the west of Ireland, like Mayo, Galway, I'm like Connacht in general, and again even in the southwest as well. They're really they're
Yeah.
thin places. Like the barrier between
Oh yeah.
here
Oh
and
yeah.
the other is thin. Like but like
Yeah.
May, a lot of people don't really know that much about Mayo. Like Mayo is an incredible place. But it's like, I mean,
I
from
know.
from your travels that, like, it's like people tend to go to Galway or they go to Kerry, the Ring of Kerry, and that kind of stuff. And like
Yeah.
there's incredibly beautiful places in Mayo, and like things like what do you call it? Like Duloc, near Delphi,
Yeah.
where they had the
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
the but there's always some story of or direct relationship with some tragedy. There's always something, and generally through
Always.
the suppression of the people by the empire at the time, but the famine, and I think that's one thing for the context for our listeners here, is that the famine decimated County Mayo, absolutely decimated County Mayo, to the point where like the one of the county mottos is like "God help us," like it was this western fringes and the periphery of Europe that was harsh landscape, but the people were under the cosh, and really, like that lineage of like suffering and of rebellion, and so many failed rebellions. It's so long, and like there's such a history of it, that it really doesn't surprise me to know that like your name and your ancestry was known when you turned up there. Like I remember, like when I was growing up, like in the 90s, there was like a kid in school, and like his like great grandfather like like was a turncoat to the Black and Tans, Right. And it was still talked about,
Yeah.
80 years, 90 years later, people were like, well, yeah, his great grandfather
Yeah.
was a grass to the British. And it's like that. I
Yeah.
mean, talk about being like completely unfair, but that's how that stuff was relatively common, like in those rural areas. Like the memories are long. People live there, families there for 100 years. They're still
Yeah.
considered blow-ins. It's
Well, like I used to be a McNally, and I can tell you I'm not anymore. You know,
yeah.
somebody joined the wrong army, and no, but so my favorite letter between my uncle and Yeats is actually the one where Yeats is asking him to change the names of the characters in the play because the activities are so sinister and notorious. He doesn't want to hurt anyone in living times,
Mm-hmm.
because my uncle's right. My uncle's grandfather was the one who found the Spancel of Death in the chimney breast of this infamous witch,
Right.
and was the one that brought it to the church to be displayed as a a deterrent to magical use. And
Mm.
he was the engineer who took down her cottage. And my uncle's saying to Yeats, he's going, it's notorious. Everyone knows this story. All the names are known. Anyone who's left in this line is the last person at 94 is uh will be dead within weeks, and he's
Yeah.
saying it's too late to hide these notorious facts. It's absolutely true and absolutely real. And I can see why, like, someone like Lady Gregory would really appreciate, like, the reality of the language and the storytelling and how
Mm.
he went. Well, he came from Bell, so he had
Mm.
spoken to every person who'd survived this event, even to the fact, and this is hard when you're staging it, that it's overwritten in the fact that he adds too many names. So who was the butler, who drove the horse cart, who was fired the week before, and he's giving you the names of the blacksmiths who might have turned the anvil or done a bit of magic back in Eris. He's giving all these details, pedantically giving details. And the actors are like, do we have to name the butler? And I'm like, for the first production, absolutely, we need to sound everything, because he's brought the world to this page. Like he's secured it in amber, and let's honor it at least now in this first or second uh, outgoing, and then maybe we can cut out some of that detail and the footnotes. And he was a natural anthropologist. He was a scientist, and he was a great scholar. So it was very, very, very important to him, the accuracy. So it's thrilling when you're reading to know to the very best of his knowledge that this is all true, true, true. And it captures some things at the time, like two of the young men are taking to schnapping women, is the phrase, and they're kidnapping young girls and giving them to rich old merchants and getting the hostage money to live on. Like, and this was apparently a thing that was done, and he's capturing that, and he's capturing, like, the desperation of having to steal turnips, or what a poacher would do to the man that was caught. And he's just collecting all of these, that whole tiny little part of Western Ireland. He's just collecting, and it's thrilling to know. It's thrilling to know. It's like stepping back in time, and anyone who's seen it, or people attest that they really, by the time they step out of the theater, they've been in a stone cottage. Like, they really do think they're stepping out onto a windy, a windy coastline. It definitely enters you into the world, and very interesting to work with modern actors and try to get them back there. I always have to remind them just how high the stakes are. Like, stealing a sheep is hung, drawn, and quartered, or transported. If anyone overhears you speaking a word against the landlord, you're in Australia, if you're lucky. I have to keep modern actors to know, like, when a man abandons a woman at a side of the road, it's not a breakup. It's not she'll find someone else. It's the community will shun her. They won't feed her. Her children will be spat upon. She'll be eating grass at the side of the road until she's gone. Like, it's hard to work with the stakes of that time with comfortable, well-fed actors. So it's the intensity to build that to accurately portray that time is fascinating. But I've only I have chosen to work with Irish actors, so at least there's an ancestral shimmer in that. Like
Yeah.
there is a resonance that comes through, and
Yeah.
most people will come and have found an ancestor that overcame a landlord, was evicted, was transported, you know.
Yeah.
So we do ancestral work when we do stage it. I've yet to work with a non-Irish actor on the play because
Yeah.
it's so in the psyche and the blood. It's I don't know how else to do it.
Yeah, I can understand the
Yeah.
rationale with
Yeah.
that, like it just the sense of like being in this being it's almost in the soil in that area, like in the
Yeah.
stony soil of Mayo. Like yeah,
Yeah.
I can see why you made that decision. It makes sense. Particularly with a play like this that
Yeah.
is kind of looping back through time, that it's coming to, I
And
guess some sort of circular
yeah.
that motif is Spancel in itself, um to
Yeah.
to come
Yeah. And
to
just
light now, uh, I think
yeah, and looping.
it, it would be really interesting if you could give us just kind of a kind of an overview of the story.
Yes, I should have done that. I feel like I've spoken backwards. I should have started with the story. Um, yeah, okay. So it starts in 1777, close to All Hallows Eve, and basically, there's Judy Julian is this cunning woman, if you will, to use an English phrase, who is known to be working dark magics with this old book, this old good book that she inherited from her mother and her mother's mother back in Eras. And she lives in a small shack with her elder son, who's definitely sheep stealing, woman stealing, turnip stealing, a bad one, as it says, and this younger son who's a little more innocent. And her husband was transported for stealing a sheep and sent off. So she's supporting that family on arid land, just trying to survive. Now, she was a godmother to Ellen Coolgan, who's a governess at the mansion, the big house, Moore Hall, and for Henry Lynch Bloss. And he seduced her and left her with a child, which was Judy Julian's goddaughter, Ellen as well. And so her need for revenge on him, not only did he transport her husband, but the death of her goddaughter and the child that she left behind was just too much. So her revenge is very hot, and is her driving force. Um, so yeah, a lot of women come to her for tea readings and card readings and love drafts and spells, and she's making a good business round the back of the shed kind of thing, including the priest's sister is coming to her. So she's getting denounced from the pulpit constantly, never set foot in the church, and out shunned by society, but desperately needed for her gifts. So the action really starts with a young woman named Sibby Cottle. And again, all of this is true. So these are real people that did these real things. She came to be the new governess at Moore Hall and work for Sir Henry Lynch Bloss. And young, beautiful, naive. Now, what Judy claims is that she turns the anvil on the girl. And that spell, which can only be done by the seventh son of a blacksmith that have had to all be blacksmiths, when that spell is done, that person has to come to you. So that's what Judy claims in the play. So Sibby Cottle is drawn to her shed, let's say, and comes for a reading on how she's going to fit in, what the new job is going to be like. She's worried about jealousy from the housekeeper and other servants, and she's just settling in to a new world. And Judy, her revenge beginning, the plot unfolding, does a card reading with traditional cards, like playing cards, and says, well, there's love and fortune for you here. There's a fair-haired man that's going to fall desperately in love with you, and he's got riches and wealth and a home. And she's saying, this landlord is in love with you. And Sibby Cottle is like, it's impossible. Why would you look at me? but her interest is sparked. So Judy gives her a simple spell with rushlights, 7 nights, 7 lights, sevens, a lot of sevens in the play, and it's 1777, of course. Um, so the girl, does a simple love spell, and the end of that first act, she goes off to do that, and we find out at the opening of the second act that in fact he has fallen in love with her, has taken her on as a mistress in the house, and she ends up having 5 children with him. I think she has only 2 at this point. And it's 5 years later, and she comes in dressed in silks and satins, and she comes in a desperate state in the night. And meanwhile, the sons of Judy have been stealing sheep, stealing women, stealing turnips, and are always in danger of getting caught, deported, transported. And so she comes in bearing a letter saying the Sir Harry Lynch Bloss has to get married. He has to get married to a legitimate woman with money to pay off the mortgage for this property. He's not a man of his own wealth necessarily, or enough to keep the whole estate going. So Sibby Coddle is desperate that, and the letter says, pay her off, send her away, exile her from the country, or abandon her, and those bastard children, get rid of her. So there's a plot afoot to get rid of her, and she's feeling very, very insecure. Meanwhile, the priest and the bailiff have been at Judy Julian saying they're going to evict her for reasons of black magic and all sorts. And so she's desperate to stay in the house. So she needs Sibby Coddle to have power over the landlord, and she's puts it in her mind that she has to do the Spancel of Death. She has to do this incredible act of dark, dark magic to bind him to her forever. So this scene is fascinating. This is the spider in the web. She's weaving using the desperation of this child, and there's so many colors. It's so subtle for the time. It's reads a lot like Lady Macbeth. It's she twists and turns her around, scares her, and then placates her. It's absolutely beautifully done. And so the Spancel of Death, to make this thing, she's finally convinced Sibby Coddle, then reveals to her that she'll have to defile a corpse. So not only will she have to she won't have to get it herself, but they will have to get a corpse, and she will have to do an anti-crucifixion on the corpse, and then peel a strip of skin from heel to shoulder and back round again. So a perfect hoop, 5 feet round, of an unbroken piece of human skin from a fresh corpse. And this is the most absolutely terrifying part of the play, is the description. They don't show the spell, which is so much worse. They describe it, so you see the horror on the girl's face as she's saying what she'll have to do, and how to use the knife, and how to get the skin just under the tip of the knife so it can be peeled back. And it's horrific. It's stunningly terrifying when you're watching it. And the girl, struggles at the end of this rope, but it really is life or death for her. This is her children and everything. And finally, she just gives away her immortal soul, essentially, to save her life, and agrees to do this thing. And yeah, so the deed is done. And we don't see that, but we see later, years and years later, the play comes back in. And this is a controversial act, because in the original scene, it ended with the defiling and the anti-crucifixion. But my uncle had to write a last act, basically to placate the theater and to placate the church, and to let the priests have their say. So there's this act where Sibby Coddle, years later, is on her deathbed, and the priests and the doctors are... It's again kind of Lady Macbeth, kind of Ophelia. This woman's gone mad because she's worn this hoop of human skin, which she bound her feet to the landlord's feet in the spell for several days, and then she's had to wear it as a belt around her own waist for the rest of her living days. And this has driven her slowly mad. This thing that she had to do, and again, all true. This has actually happened. This spancel is something my great grandfather held in his hands. It's not, none of this is untrue, which is so distressing. So the girl, yeah, it's driven mad. And we watch this descent as Judy returns to her to watch her die and watch her struggle. It's Faustian, like calling to the gods, well, God calling to the angels, asking for forgiveness and knowing that there's none for her. And there's this incredible scene of madness and despair and distress. And the priests in this case do not get the last say, and they cannot. Well, there's three endings. There's one where a priest comforts her and she dies all right. There's another where he won't comfort her and she dies horribly, horribly. And then the one that I stage, which is where we don't know either way, and Judy gets the last word and laughs as the girl convulses at her feet and she tears the spancel off her. And we don't know why she wants that back, what she's going to do with it next, what this instrument of evil is going to lead to, and why she puts it in her chimney breast for my great grandfather to find. So it's the ending is so shocking. It is so sudden and so absolutely horrific, and it's very hard on the actresses to play. They need a lot of support to get there and a lot of support after. And every time this play has been performed, all of twice so far in my productions, the audience has sat in silence without applause for a good few minutes. To the fact that the first time, the performance where we actually broke the curse, they sat in silence for 20 minutes, and I actually had to get up and break the spell in the room. I actually had to, vigorously applaud. And I ended up just saying to the crowd, I'm like, the curse is broken, you can go home. Because it's such a massive shock to see the dark feminine win, and the priest to be decimated and the girl to be absolutely destroyed like that. It's not what you expect from an Edwardian drama.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
And at the time, like I tell people at the time, like in theater at that time, women were allegories, and they were old women and gorgeous maidens that needed rescue, and they didn't say much, or they would cry out, "Come and save me, Ireland!" Like they weren't living, breathing people that had color and definition. And as someone said about James Joyce and Molly Bloom's soliloquy, women uninterrupted were a very rare thing. And in this play, these roles for women are enormous. Like the role of Judy Julian, the witch, is humongous. Anyone who plays her, like it's very hard to find an actress who can play all those colors and that subtlety and the push and pull and the revenge and the coldness and the heat. It's like, it's for, to see. I don't believe there's been a play at that time where women have had that say and to have choice and agency, and to see the wounds and the desperation and the lengths to which women literally have had to go and still are going to in certain parts of the world. And it's breathtaking. I'm totally biased, of course, but I think it's captivating, and it just runs like a juggernaut. It's not it's an hour and a half maybe when it really gets on its feet, but it's over before you know it, and you've gone there with them. You're an absolute co-conspirator. You're in the cottage, you've poached the sheep, you've peeled that corpse. Like it's relentless. Like it's exhausting as well. Like the reactions of people. I remember when we did it at Treadwell's, April 6th, amazingly, or April 5th, it was 2 years ago. People stick around. I think the show ended at 10 and people were still hanging around at 1 o'clock, just needing to talk, just going, I'm sorry, what has happened here? you know like, it definitely needs discussion, and it needs a lot of support, and it needs space to sound. It is a very powerful active ritual theater, and all of the magic within the play, knowing my uncle is accurate from the dumb books, from talking to the wise people, and he was a practitioner of magic himself, so I know he knew what he was doing. And actually, what's funny, in the first production, in the anti-crucifixion, because we've laid out an imaginary corpse, and she's walking around in the direction in the north, the south, and the east, and she's laying candles and creating holes in the corpse. And due to my, I don't know if it was dyspraxia or some agent of good looking out for us, but I accidentally staged it backwards, so that we sort of undid the magic. We did it in the wrong direction, and I had the corpse's head in the wrong place, and some magical people in the audience were like, that's the moment the curse broke, when you unwound that particular spell. That's when they felt it was released. And I'm like, okay, good. Maybe my dyslexia or dyspraxia kind of saved the day on that one. Or I just knew that it had to be undone. I'm not sure. But it was fascinating. And I've stacked the audiences every time with really strong magical people. Elise definitely standing guard at Treadwell's, which is already a charged space. But yeah. So when they're talking about each spell, each incantation, every word is the real thing, and that has to be honored and remembered. It can't be overlooked or taken for granted.
Well, that's just what an incredible story, and just reflecting on the subject matter, like how that would have been perceived at the time, with specifically the audience it was aimed at, would have been unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like really, like it would have been like,
yeah.
I think it's for people listening, it like trying to find a suitable kind of metaphor for it, would it be like, showing it like The Exorcist to a bunch of like preschoolers, in terms of the level of shock, because particularly when you're talking about that kind of I guess middle upper class theater going Dubliners of the time, we had a very romantic view of rural Ireland and people who were, well, essentially poor people, right? Poor people in the country, and it would have been romanticized a huge amount. This isn't a romantic story.
Yeah.
This is a brutal story.
It's horrible.
Well,
in one of the letters, yeah, and one of the letters between Yeats, my uncle, and Gregory and the management, they said that this play which they were mounting at Easter, you can never forget that they have a witch winning an argument with a priest, speaking evil over a priest, absolutely decimating a priest, and an anti-crucifixion on Easter week. And this letter says either this play will do really, really well, or it really, really won't. And I think, this is my personal theory, but I think Yeats may have been hoping for a riot or some massive reaction. This is a very subversive piece of theater, let alone the women getting to speak, but the actions they get away with it, And to put that in front of like Edwardian people, I mean, picture yourself in The Importance of Being Earnest, and then put The Exorcist inside that. It's just, it's totally insane. It's insane.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know they love a good riot at the Abbey.
That's I'm just putting in the context of the time. I mean, that is
full
on for the time.
Crazy, right?
I mean, it's full on now. I mean, that's a punchy play now, but like the sensitivity, the sensitivities of the time, what it was saying about the church, which was just inassailable, to the Catholic community. It's interesting in the time as well, it being kind of 1777. Is that when it was based, if I recall correctly?
Yeah.
Because and it wasn't too long before the 1798 rebellion, which Mayo was a hotbed of that, and in fact Mayo was declared a republic in 1798 because the French landed in Killala in North Mayo, and actually would have liberated down. They got down as far as Castlebar, so they would have been in Balla as well. and they were certainly around my neck of the woods.
Oh yeah.
And the whole place was declared
Yeah.
a
What's your next
republic.
trip?
Foxford.
Okay,
So
cool.
up over near Lough Conn.
Mhm.
But yeah, that whole area, you know, was was like on fire with
I know.
war when the French arrived to fight the British. But it's incredible to think about that. And what's kind of firing off for memories for me is what the main weapon that the people had was a weapon that blacksmiths could make, which was a pike, which was a kind of a long 9-foot pole or 12-foot pole sometimes, with a spear, but with a hook on the spear. And the hook was supposedly designed to kind of pull strapping from horses, to kind of unsaddle somebody. But really they'd kind of be this big kind of
Amazing.
column of bristling pikemen approaching the well-drilled army of the British Empire. And they had some moderate success, but like
Oh my
these
God.
things, until the likes of 1916 happened, which again was another failed rebellion. But that kicked
Yeah.
off the War of Independence and what have you. Like it's hard to put into context that like literally every generation was at it. There was always some rebellion.
Yeah.
But the Easter Rising one was the one that really changed the path of the country. And so for it to happen
Well, I
on
would
that
say
day. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, like symbolic. Oh, sorry, I think we have a delay. I'm sorry.
And
A symbolic victory, but an actual loss.
yes,
Like it was such a terrible beauty, right? It was
yeah,
a beautiful theatrical ritual death
yeah,
that could not be ignored by the nation. Like
yes,
the way it was staged, the GPO looks like this Grecian temple.
yeah.
Uh, oh my goodness. And poets and playwrights and the Abbey actor rebels, I just think extraordinary that the night before there's an actress sleeping on the proclamation thinking they're a pile of playbills. I love how the actors and the artists were in there. It's like incredible. And one of the cast members of Spancel, I think, was the first to shoot and die at Dublin Castle as well. Like
Really?
these
Wow.
were warrior artists. It's breathtaking to think that, they put their money where their mouth was and they were reading these plays and oh my gosh. It's they're just heroes. The commemorations were so overwhelming to visit Dublin and be hit by that much ancestral activation in one weekend really was so profound. And to see what the women did, I thought that was astounding because they've been overlooked, especially in the uprising, for so long. And I thought in 2016, they really let the women and children step forward and say they were the runners, they were taking care of the men, they were the nurses, they were the spies. Like to finally get their say, I think was hugely important. Not to overlook the contributions of the men, but to also balance out that.
No,
It's great.
absolutely, absolutely. There's a relative of mine from kind of was I I think that this is purely anecdotal now and just a humorous story, but she was I think if I remember correctly, something like she was expelled from Come on the Man. So like the kind of the order of
Yeah.
women, yeah, the Republican kind of sisterhood, right? She was for being almost like too Republican, so like she was kind of an out and out
Oh
maniac,
no.
yeah. And but wore her like gabardine and like part uniform well into the 1950s, like on a daily basis. And
Yeah.
my dad said, like, if there was anybody who had anything remotely to do with the rising or indeed kind of the War of Independence, she just habitually went to these funerals, of all these kind of elderly IRA
Yeah.
men dying in this 1960s and 50s. But like,
Nice.
it's just such an Irish story of kind of idiosyncrasy and oddness. But it just made me laugh.
Yeah. I love
But
I'm I'm trying to find out about my uncle's like his credit as a rebellious, like to
mhm,
get him on that plaque in the Abbey, I have to prove
mm,
his activities. Um, one of the things I'm looking into is at his funeral, as you say, all the heads of the Irish Republican Army,
Mm.
everyone was at his funeral. This quiet man who was almost something,
Hmm.
the play that was never seen, the playwright, like the Abbey Theatre were making sketches for his oil portrait.
Right.
Like they really did think he was going to be a very promising next big thing. He was up there with Sing. I think they were sort of grooming him
Right.
to be very important to them. And this is, Lady Gregory and Yeats made a
Yeah.
great contribution to try and get his work seen.
Hmm. Yeah.
He only had one other production that got anywhere, and that was which I think you might really enjoy, is Fin Vara Ma, which
Okay.
is an Irish pantomime
Mm.
about proper she and fae stories,
Yeah. Finvara. Yeah.
uh, and he thought,
Mm.
yeah, he thought that Santa Claus was too British and the
Hmm.
children of Ireland deserved their own Christmas entertainment. So he wrote really serious fairy lore,
Yeah.
like proper, like even I was just listening to one of your podcasts and it sounded like the opening of his pantomime, because he's talking about the angels that fell after the Great War in heaven that
Mm.
became the she and the fae. And I was like,
Mm.
oh my God, he's put all this magic into this incredible 5-hour pantomime that was critically acclaimed. But again, because of his activities, he ended up being transported to New Zealand for his own protection.
Really? Oh,
So his
wow.
career was like, yeah, he was sent away. Letter from De Valera to the people of New Zealand saying he was a national treasure, on par with Sing, and a great
Yeah.
artist, a great playwright that should be protected. So would they look after him? And they
Hmm.
made him clerk in the city hall in Wellington, and he was terribly bored for the few years he lived there. But yeah, so he never
um,
got that oil portrait. He never got his revolutionary dues.
um, so if people want to follow more about the Spancel of Death and more about your work, um, where do
Yeah.
you live on the interwebs?
I've mostly been hidden, so I'm just figuring out how to be found. But you can join me on Drawing Strength on Facebook and Instagram. I'm ephotography or strength drawing strength. And if you want to watch the Zoom version of the Spancel of Death, the little bits
Mm.
that we did manage to do, it's on. I called the talk "Deconstructing Erin," and that's a Women's Day talk, and we'll give you a lot more insight, and you can
Yeah.
hear some of the dialogue, which will really bring it to life. So I would look up "Deconstructing Erin" for the IRL festival.
Brilliant. Okay.
And yeah, and just my name, you could find me.
Wonderful. Well, thank
Yeah.
you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Well, that was absolutely wonderful. I enjoyed that so much. That really ticked an awful lot of boxes for me. It had history, rebellion, these huge characters in Irish history just popping up in Aoife's family almost casually, and of course Magick and my beloved County Mayo. So wonderful, wonderful stuff. That was a glorious, glorious show. Hopefully we'll get Aoife back again. I have a feeling there's more to come from this story, and hopefully we can get Aoife to come back again and tell us a little bit more about her ongoing work in this area and on this subject. Okay, that's it from me. Talk soon and take care.